I've walked into brands that are hemorrhaging. They're losing employees, they're losing business, and they have certain expectations. I walked into brands that are doing well, but their expectations are like 300% growth, but they only want to invest in like 10% of their time and money and energy. I'm like, wow, that's like talking to your CPA, telling them you make, 50,000 a year and expecting to retire on an island that costs 5 million.
Welcome to Making It to Market, the podcast where we discuss everything about taking your product or service idea through to commercialization. I'm your host, Dahlia Kelada. Well, we're back again with Jonathan Fisher, chairman of BrandExtract. Last time we talked about marketing touchpoints, attempting to sell an ugly baby, rebranding, and buyer personas. Today, we're back again to talk about brand erosion, how marketing supports sales, and some insight into investing into your brand's advertising and marketing program. Let's get into it. Welcome back, Jonathan. Happy to have you.
Well, thank you for having me.
Before we get started, I've been meaning to ask you, what are some of the nonprofits that you're involved in?
Yeah, I've worked with a number of nonprofits over the years. I sort of subscribe by the philosophy if you teach someone to fish, rather than give them a fish, they can feed the village and their family and themselves. So I'm attracted to nonprofits that have sort of geometric returns involved with them. They can be, literacy and education because you can break the life cycles of, somebody's ability to get a job or not get a job, to, travel, to communicate, to earn a living, so that one act has a very large compounding act around it. I've worked with over the last, I guess, last decade to help start a nonprofit called the Houston Community Toolbank. They're an affiliate from Toolbank USA, and essentially what it is it's a giant warehouse full of tools, hammers, saws, ladders, you name it, anything that you would use to perform a project. And the philosophy is simply that rather than the thousands of nonprofits in the city try to maintain their own little tools for their own jobs, they can come to this one place if you're volunteering and get all the tools they would ever
Whoa,
need. It's like walking into Home
that's so
Depot
cool.
and and you need 1,000 shovels. We got 1,000 shovels. Why should you buy 1,000 shovels once
Uh-huh.
and waste your money? And then how are you going to store them? How are you going to maintain them? How are you going to repair them? How are you going to insure them? How do you know if you got the right shovel, right? So the whole concept behind the Houston Community Tool Bank is that nonprofits shouldn't have to stock this inventory and waste their money and their resources on it. They can do the thing that they do best. And when they need a pump, a ladder, you name it, lawnmowers, chainsaws, power drills for themselves or for their volunteers, they can come and it's a lending library, check it in,
Wow.
check it out,
That is so
you know?
interesting. Wow.
And so essentially, rather than everybody buy 1,000 hammers once for
Mm-hmm.
themselves, I have 1,000 hammers they can use
Share.
1,000 times to whoever 1,000 companies want to
Mm.
use it with or 1,000 volunteers
Oh
want to
my
use it
gosh,
for.
I love that.
So we literally have a warehouse with, like, I lost count. I want to say it's over 50,000 items in it that you can come and borrow if you're a volunteer and doing community good for a
Wow, that's
nonprofit.
so amazing.
And the nonprofit will check it out. And so any nonprofits that are out there, any corporations that are doing this as a service,
That is so
it's a
interesting.
big deal. They want to be part of it,
Wow.
and they want to come and get involved with the tool bank. I helped found it with a lot of other dedicated individuals in this town and a lot of businesses that raised money to stock the inventory and buy the inventory and be part of the franchise.
Oh, was such a good cause.
And they service pretty much, disasters too. They work with the first responders that are out there, the people that go in after hurricanes.
Wow, Jonathan, that is so wonderful. I love hearing you getting out into the community and helping out like that. Well, thanks for being back on the show again. Let's get started. So let's talk about, how do brands become eroded?
Well, overpromising and underdelivering, obviously, I think is one of the first places people make a mistake. They're a little too confident, better to underpromise than overdeliver. Everybody's delighted and surprised. They got more for their dollar than they expected, or more service or more delivery than expected. To the degree you can do it within reason and not put yourself out of business, that's a good strategy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But if you're giving away 200%, your margins are negative, you're in trouble for
Yeah.
that. So, you know, ways that people, will often make mistake is not looking at the entire process. They try to cut corners. They will take a complicated process that worked in one market, assume it works in the other market, and it doesn't.
Mm.
And so, we use the analogy of selling cakes versus cupcakes. Sometimes the buyer just wants a cupcake, but you're trying to sell them a cake, or you have a process that is 9 layers and they just need a bite. So be cautious of that. I've seen companies that take something that works well in one place and try to replicate it in another place, but then they don't realize the differences,
Mm-hmm.
cultural differences, political differences, geographical differences. In the South, for example, it's really not a unionized construction space, but
Mm-hmm.
in the North it is. And so the value propositions are different if you're say a builder, a developer, industrial, commercial, residential, whatever it might be, sometimes, and you go into those union markets, that's a whole nother world.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go in with the exact set of messages, the exact set of processes and thinking, you're probably not going to be as successful.
I appreciate you saying that, especially from the cultural thing. I worked at Halliburton for a little bit, and my background's in marketing and advertising, but they wouldn't allow me in that position to produce any materials because they wanted to control the message at the corporate level. The marketing team
Mm-hmm.
did. And we were putting out an ad. It was for drilling and completion fluids. And we were putting out an ad in the Middle East. And the ad team came back with a person, the persona that didn't match the Middle East, first of all.
Mm-hmm.
And the message that they used on there was something, we love something. And I can tell you, being Middle Eastern myself, you don't say those words. You don't say love. You don't, that's a very
Right.
American westernized language. So I mean, just when you're saying that, it reminds me of that experience I had.
Yeah, so the concepts of reliability in the US mean one thing very different than, say, certain Asian countries where they might be associated more with counterfeit.
Mm,
You know, green or environmentally friendly in one part of the world might be associated, as a positive, protection and all that good stuff we think of. But in another part of the world, it might be associated with red tape. It might be associated with price,
mm,
hassles. So this goes back to getting those personas right, understanding the cultural differences. It's not just about translation, it's about adaptation.
mm.
And the best marketers and companies that are out there understand that, and they will adapt accordingly into those markets appropriately for what they're doing. If you just literally translate something,
Mm-hmm.
you often run into trouble.
Well, and it's
Um,
insulting too. It can be very insulting,
like,
especially if you
absolutely.
don't get the right. You choosing a different ethnicity and saying it's Middle Eastern, completely different, and then it's just like there's no. To me, it's a disrespectful thing to put out something that doesn't match the persona. Or if you're trying to tell me that this person's Middle Eastern when I know they're not, like how do I trust that brand if they don't figure out who I am? If they don't try to
Well, they're not
understand
being
me.
authentic, right? They're not
Mm,
being authentic
there you go.
to who they are and to
Mm-hmm.
you and the customer from back to their reality versus your reality, back to that perspective and understanding, what matters to that market, that buyer, that geography, whatever it might be. I can talk about everything I know in Texas and pretend like I do exactly the same thing in DC or Tennessee or wherever it might be. But the reality is the temperature's different.
Mm-hmm.
The environment's different.
Yeah.
The raw material that's required to build in those markets is different. The applications are different. So if I take the exact same thing that I was preaching in one place and try to preach it in another place where it doesn't have the same relevance, what's going to happen, right? They're not going to believe me, or they'll buy it and it'll fail. And
Mm-hmm.
again, it goes all back to that brand as a promise, and you have
Mm.
to live up to that promise. Um, so this is why you start at the core and you run those SWOTs. You do the three-legged stool approach. You look for those positioning, pieces within the Venn diagram, and you build off of that. And so there is a scaffolding to this process that you work off of. You know.
I'm interested in the go-to-market plan because it kind of ties back into the SWOT story. So, what is a go-to-market plan, and who needs it?
Well, if we're going to talk about go-to-market plans, it essentially goes back to the definition of marketing that we started with. Think of the four P's: the product, the price, the place, and the promotion. And a plan is essentially those definitions put into paper with a strategy and sometimes the tactics for it. So it can be the budgets, it can be the timelines, it can be it defines the channels, it can define the messaging that you're going to go to market with. So when you're talking about building a go-to-market plan, you're essentially agreeing and aligning the internal stakeholders that are part of the process through that plan. Sales is going to do this, marketing is going to do that, finance is going to do this, purchasing is going to do that, CEO is going to give us the budget, or CFO, whatever it might be. And you are focusing the team. So if you're going to market without a plan, how do you know where everybody's headed?
Mm-hmm.
Are the salespeople just picking whoever they want to sell to? Any industries they just choose are appropriate?
Yeah.
How do you know where to advertise your dollars? Which trade shows to go to? Which magazines to market in? Which key terms to focus on? How much money to spend on one channel versus another channel?
Mm-hmm.
So the plan defines that and helps define that and align people. I just had a conversation with a company, and there was a half a dozen people in the room, and they couldn't agree on what was their audience and which audience was a priority. Which one should they
Oh.
sell the most of first?
Mm-hmm.
So, and I asked questions like, where do you have the most history? Where do you have case studies? What is a net new market for you versus an existing market that you can cross sell or upsell? Which market is likely to have a shorter sales cycle? The plan defines those things and says, okay, given this, we should go here first and spend this or expect this in terms of the ROI. It helps define and break down everything so that when you go to create the ad or the websites or the trade show booths or whatever those things that you're going to be implementing and along the customer journey, you are working in alignment with your organization and your team and your
Right.
agency or your
Mm-hmm.
freelancers or consultants or whoever you're doing. So that's essentially what a go-to-market plan is. It really is the unification of effort, if you
Yeah.
will, for a process that you plan on executing.
And it takes away the siloed approach for just branding, just being marketing. It shows all levels of responsibility in this whole process, I think.
Yeah, I've seen massive organizations have huge sales forces and big internal marketing teams, and the two don't even talk to each other, or they're adversarial to each other. It's awful,
Mm-hmm.
and yet they're expected to each achieve their own goals, but they might be pulling in the opposite directions.
Yeah.
I've seen salespeople in an organization literally stop selling because they hit their sales quotas. I've also seen them sell the cheapest, easiest product with the lowest margin, but the product they didn't sell sat on the shelf. And the longer it sat on the shelf, the lower the value it was. And when they eventually did sell it, they had to sell it at a 20 to 30%
Oh
loss of what
man.
they originally could have sold it for. So imagine the sales compensation structure is vastly misaligned with the marketing initiatives. The
Yeah.
marketing was told, push the high product stuff, push the stuff with the most margin, push the thing before it ages out, whatever it might be. Um, and the sales force is doing almost the exact opposite because their quota was met.
Oh,
So they just shut down at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. That's like the strangest thing I've ever witnessed.
wow.
I was like, what is going on here? There was no unification. There was no alignment. There was no plan in that organization. And so whatever it might be, it's important to build those endorsements, not consensus. You're not asking for consensus. You're asking for endorsement in this
Oh,
process.
how do you get
So,
that? What's your advice for better collaboration among sales and marketing?
well, I think understand first off, doing if you work on a customer journey map, you will realize that it is not usually a binary process. It's not lead the horse to water and then serve up the drink. There's often a conversation or many touch points along the way. And you want marketing to support sales. And when they understand each other are working together for the same the same goal, and they realize how each other benefit along that customer journey, helping each other, then they generally get in line because they're like, oh wait, you can help me close the deal faster. Oh, you can help me defend my price point. Oh, you can bring me better qualified leads. You can bring me more leads. Okay. What happens if the guy makes the call and he doesn't bite, or the lady has, does the pitch and they don't close, right? That's where marketing can come in. They can nurture the process. They can continue to add touch points. What if they bought but they didn't buy that much? Does sales have a responsibility? Who owns that continuation of that loyalty and that life cycle? This is a complicated process. It's generally not one and done,
Hmm.
you know?
It's a
Um,
culture. The
yeah,
co-
so you have to have the right culture. You have to have the right plan. You have to help people understand the journey and the roles they play and the acts and the actions they take. And when you do all that, you can open their eyes to the opportunities, and they get excited because people generally want to succeed. And if you give them a method and an approach and a philosophy and a process, whatever it might be, they get on board. And if the ones that don't, they eventually leave.
yeah.
They aren't good. They aren't as successful. I've seen sales organizations, cherry pick the best salespeople and they use them to train others, right? They want to coach them in that process so those others can be the rising tide can lift all boats. So they want them to come along, and if you sit down and talk with really good salespeople, they'll understand and talk about the importance of branding and positioning and marketing. It makes their job easier, and vice versa. Marketing's job is going to be made easier too. I just had a conversation with a new client, and they are very disconnected in that process. And when I told them we wanted to go in and look at the sales process and the sales methodology, they just kind of said, "Yeah, we do too." You
Oh,
know,
they don't
it
have one.
was like,
Huh.
we're not allowed over the fence,
Oh, wow.
and it's just such a lost opportunity.
Sure is.
And they get it, but their hands are tied. And so I said, well, I kind of don't accept that. I'm going to do everything I can to get you over the fence. My job is going to be to help you.
Have you ever done that where you've been asked to go in and kind of pitch the idea of
Oh
marketing?
yeah. We're often brought in to be, quote, the bad cop, if you will. And well, the thing is that they've said it a couple of times, but nobody listened to them. Okay. But when, quote, the hired expert comes in and says it,
Oh,
and
it's,
then they bring in
yeah.
all the data and they bring in the customer's perspectives and they bring in the competitive differentiation arguments, you suddenly, instead of one voice, you have many voices now saying, hey, you need to listen to us, you know. And we hear a lot. It's unfortunate, but it's, as they say, it's very hard to be a prophet in your own land, you know. So it's just something about human nature. If literally, if I call in somebody in my town and I call in somebody in another town, I'm suddenly like five times the expert, in the other town. Um, because I'm new, I'm different. I must know something that they don't know already. And so I think the lack of respect is sometimes attributed to just being there. These people are brilliant. They've been saying what we walk in and reinforce them with, but because we said it, it suddenly carries more cachet in the process. But but on top of that, we really do put the science behind it. We put the homework behind it. We put the customer perspectives behind it. We go back to that three-legged stool over and over again with clients to help drive this in the right direction. We often use a technique where we talk about subbing the word like for what works.
Yep.
People often internally say, well, I like this or I don't like that, to which I respond, that's great. I don't really care what you like. I care what works.
All right.
And I mean that in the nicest way. That sounds a little blunt right now. But in the reality is you can like pink, but if the customer doesn't want pink, the customer wants orange or blue, we can push pink out there all day long and it won't be successful, in that process. So we have to look at what works. And that goes back to managing and testing and constantly working to improve what works. So what worked last year may not work this year. We had a client that drove originally 2,000% of their opportunities through LinkedIn, but over the last 12 years we've worked with this client, over time, other channels have superseded that, and that channel has diminished. And so, as much as I love LinkedIn, it isn't working, and I needed to shift as the market was shifting. The locations were shifting for where we could reach these people. Their behaviors were shifting. And so it's a really good philosophy to say you can have an opinion and you can talk about what you like, but it's better to talk about what works in this
Mm.
process.
And how do you
Um,
know how do you define works? What works?
Go back to what's appropriate, go back
Okay.
to what's authentic, go back to that Venn diagram, go back to what the data tells you, do your testing, you know. Um, I think it was Harry Beckwith in Selling Invisible. If I get this right again, you're gonna have to fact check me. But he said, I think he said that all experts are wrong 17.5% of the time.
Yeah, we just convince you that we know what we're talking about.
Only, yeah, reverse the math on that. So it only, 17.5% of what I'm telling you today will be wrong.
Oh
So
man. Well,
if
there's no need for me to fact check then. I'll just let that one slide.
but it goes back to, don't, you gotta do like every good person does and test it and prove it and repeat it and make sure that it's working and continues to work, because what worked yesterday may not work tomorrow. And it's true with anything.
Yeah.
And it requires a constant tending and evergreen approach to this process. And that's the thing that we try to preach to these clients is it truly isn't set it and forget it,
Right.
because things can run their course, that the competitors can come in with something new, a bigger, better mousetrap, the climate. And by that, I mean the environment, the world, the perspectives. War breaks out, price points change. Okay, this was an appropriate price point
Tell me
once, now
about
it's
it.
not, you
Yeah.
know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, supply chain disruptions. Okay, how do we get around this now? How do we reposition? I was selling chairs to offices now, but nobody's going to the office. How do I sell chairs to consumers for their home office?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what was working for the corporate office doesn't necessarily work for the home office. Things
Right.
changed.
Mm-hmm.
If I didn't pivot, I was in trouble in this process.
Yeah. You have to innovate your
Yeah,
business in order to survive.
yeah. And companies that did pivot during the last 2 years did better than those that didn't. I had clients that literally called and said, "Shut everything down for 6 months. Call us back. We'll see if we're closing the plant. Nobody's going to be doing this."
Right. Like the whole hand sanitizer industry where alcohol companies were, innovating and taking advantage of that, taking advantage of the market need.
Yeah, I know people that, suddenly discovered new core competencies at different applications. And it's almost sad that it took something like a pandemic, or now maybe a war for some people, or supply chain disruptions, that it's sad that these companies, it took those catastrophic type of events for them to force them to evaluate their true strengths. Okay? If you manufacture something, you tend to associate your skill with that end product, and the skill may be in the doing, not the thing. If you make something that's incredibly small and can go into many things, and your skill needs to be looking at how you manufacture small things and can sell them to, make them for other companies that also need small things, not necessarily the widget you make that is small
Mm-hmm.
in that process. And so companies that had fabrication techniques, I know trade show houses that suddenly started making, acrylic, face shields and divider systems, because they're used to working with acrylic for environment displays, building desks for news stations and trade show booths and whatnot. The skills they had other applications, or the product, the raw material they had other applications in the marketplace. And companies many times overlook that because they're so busy focused on just perfecting the thing they have,
Yeah.
not realizing that they have other strengths and opportunities within the organization. But if you think about it from that SWOT perspective, if you think about it from the end user perspective, and you think about it from the market opportunity perspective and differentiation, you can suddenly sometimes create new opportunities that you never thought existed
Mm-hmm.
in the process, or find new revenue channels.
Right.
I worked for a number of manufacturers, and manufacturers would often give away the engineering to get the production, to win the production process. Well, the engineering is highly valuable sometimes, and companies will pay for it. It can be a whole separate revenue stream. really helping companies think about, how they're going to design the product before you make it. So something that may be a loss leader or value add can turn into being a revenue stream or even a competitive differentiation.
I'm with Jonathan Fisher of BrandExtract. Hey guys, check out BrandExtract's podcast called Solving for B. Stick around till after the break. You don't want to miss Jonathan explain the difference between soup and cake. I've experienced my customers giving me ideas for business.
Customers, okay, we have interviewed thousands of customers, and they are a wealth of opportunity. You will learn so much by talking to customers. Um, it's just, I will tell a company this, and I will go to my grave saying it. If you do not talk to your customers, you're giving up an opportunity. I guarantee you will learn something. I don't know how much. I don't care how much you think you know. You will learn something. And sometimes that thing you will learn will rock and change your world
Oh, absolutely.
in ways you
Yeah.
never imagined. And so when we talk to customers, we understand their vocabulary, we understand their mindsets, we understand their decision processes, their likes and dislikes, their works and doesn't works, right?
Mm-hmm.
We understand their why buys, why not buys, what what is the pain of switching versus not switching, what product do they understand or not understand. I'm doing interviews right now for a company asking them, do you even know what our brands are that we sell? Do you care about the brand or you just care about what it does?
Hmm.
You know, I'm asking them, what are their trends? What are they doing? What do they forecast for the next year? Because my client wants to know what inventory to buy more of. I'm asking them how they're different in the marketplace. I've already been given several ideas of things that they don't offer from a service standpoint that they could do that could help differentiate them or they could even charge for. Um, we've gotten a glimpse into some operational deficiencies that are eroding the brand as it's being delivered. Again, it's not my job to fix operations, but it is my job to point out when something operationally doesn't support the promises I'm making
Mm-hmm.
in that process. So, I'm not an operations consultant, but I will tell you this thing is causing a problem.
Yes.
If you tell me you're fast and your delivery drivers use paper tickets and you have to wait 4 hours for them to
Oh,
return in order to tell the customer when they call up asking the status of the delivery where it's at, because you aren't using technology, I have a hard time promising you're fast when there's,
exactly.
I can track my pizza being made. and
Mm-hmm.
you're a $500 million company, not you still using paper tickets. Um,
Yeah.
these are stories, that come from a place of experience. So I want to be, you want to be authentic to the process, and you want to understand that SWOT and be true to how you're going to deliver and on the whole experience. So
I know at Brand Extract, you guys have posted online a guide to brand strategy. I'm going to put that link in the show notes. So if you're listening and you want more information about how to get going, that's a great resource for you to look at. What's the biggest or most common mistake you come across with your clients?
I think the biggest or most common mistake is assuming they know what they know. I hear it a lot. We know our customer, our product is perfect, or we don't have any competition. I think it's not wanting to take the time to do a proper assessment, to do a proper discovery, to do a proper competitive analysis. They have done it before or did it internally and they think it's good. But they often didn't do it the way we did it or from the perspective we have. And so they'll unload material on me saying, here, you don't need to do this again. You can skip this step. I have it. But then I start looking into it and I start asking them questions. They're like, oh, we didn't ask that question, or we didn't put it in this context, or we led the witness, by asking it this way, or they didn't do enough of it, or whatever it might be. It's dated. It's just really not. I think no matter who they work with, whether it's us or some other agency, if you're going to bring an expert in, bring the expert in and let them run their process. Don't try to circumvent what they're doing
Amen.
because you're trying to shave some corners.
Yes.
Yeah, you can ask them, is there a way to condense this time frame? Ask them, is there a way to make this more efficient? And there's usually a few tricks they can pull, but there becomes a point where you're not, if you don't do these steps, you just don't have it. I liken it to the difference between a soup recipe and a cake recipe. And this is an analogy I'll use a lot with clients. I'll say, what is the difference between a soup recipe and a cake recipe? Any idea?
Oh, you're asking me?
Yeah, I'll ask you.
Ingredients?
Well, basically, for the most part, if you don't have flour and eggs, you don't get cake. If you don't bake it exactly for this length of time and
Yeah.
exactly
Yeah.
this temperature, you don't get cake. You get a briquette or you get goo.
Yeah.
Okay. So a cake recipe is generally a very formulaic process to baking something so that it comes out the right way.
Mm-hmm.
A soup recipe, not so much, right?
Just throw it all in there.
I can throw a little bit more salt. I can leave the salt out. I can cook it for 20 minutes. I can cook it for an hour on low.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
It's
I can
forgiving.
add more carrots. I can put my spin on it with some onions, right? Like a soup recipe largely is kind of gooey and squishy by its nature. Now, it may taste
Oh my
slightly
gosh.
different at the end, but you still pretty much have soup.
Yeah.
It might be a little warmer, might be
That's
a little
funny.
spicier, might be a little colder. It's still soup, you know? It's not goo versus cake.
Cake sounds so good right now.
So, so, be careful that you're not making soup and that you're baking cake in
Good
this process.
advice.
And that's what a good plan is. And I don't want anybody to think I'm not in love with making soup or I love cakes better. But to help executives visualize their state that they are in, I will use this analogy. Look, you're just stirring a lot of stuff in here. Sometimes you do it this way, sometimes you don't do it that way. Sometimes you add these ingredients or add this, price point or whatever it might be. I said, you're really right now in the business of making soup. I think you should be in the business of making cake, and this is the steps and the things you should be doing for this length of time at these points in the process. You don't put the eggs in the right order, problem.
Yeah.
No cake.
You
Um,
get soup.
you leave the flour out, you may not get cake at all, right? You may
Yeah.
get like 80 soup stuff, right? So I think for the most part, we preach this idea, this concept of like having a really solid recipe and with the right process and procedures and steps. And that's sales and marketing working together, right? It's all those ingredients working together in that process. So I think the mistake is often expecting they're going to make a cake out of soup, even though they're not willing to change anything,
Oh,
or
yeah.
assuming they have all the ingredients and
Mm-hmm.
they really don't have all the ingredients in the right order or what they need. So if you're going to bring somebody in and you hired them to do the thing you hired them to do, let them do it. And also let them do it with the right time frames and the right budgets. Because if you try to expect, like I always tell people, man, if I had a magic wand or a crystal ball, I would be way more successful. I
Amen.
wish I could just come in and snap my fingers and go, here's your answer.
There you go.
You know, sometimes it's kind of obvious, but you still want to go through the process. And even we don't want to make assumptions. Just because I did it this way for the last 3 clients may not mean that you're in the exact same situation. I don't sell necessarily a canned solution. I know canned solutions work in a lot of situations for a lot of companies, but we're in the business of customization. I'm in the business of branding. I'm in the business of differentiation. So that means I'm not going to come in and do the same thing I did for you for 20 other companies exactly like you because one, my job is to crush them. I got to invent over the last thing I did for the last client I worked with that was like you because my job, I'm no longer working for them. I can't be
Mm-hmm.
strategic for two companies competing for the same audiences at the same time, you know? So they're going to hire somebody that's job is to crush you. You're hiring me. My job is to crush them, so to speak. And I don't want to sound very capitalistic in all this, or because there are win-win ratios and all that's out there. But in an oversimplified storyline here, yeah, I'm being hired to be strategic and let make sure you invest in the right time, in the right process, and with the right budget because you can't expect miracles by, oh, we're going to spend $100 and it's going to take 1 million and you're going to expect the same results for $1 million.
I think people do expect that. They expect that.
Yeah.
Or if they have a little bit of
Well,
dollars, they'll just put it in social media and hope it works.
I think that people just don't have context. And so they do have expectations back. It's back to their realities as their perceptions. And our job as professionals is to ground them in the reality of what is honest and what is authentic and what can be done with the resources they have, be it the time or the comp. I've walked into brands that are hemorrhaging. They're losing employees, they're losing business, and they have certain expectations. I walked into brands that are doing well, but their expectations are like 300% growth, but they only want to invest in like 10% of their time and money and energy. I'm like, wow, that's like talking to your CPA, telling them you make, 50,000 a year and expecting to retire on an island that costs 5 million. I'm not sure it's possible.
Mm-hmm.
Talk to your wealth advisor. They're going to tell you how much money you need to save over the course of this period of time to actually be able to afford that purchase. It just comes a point where the math doesn't add up.
Is there a recommended percent budget you should allocate to advertising? I did my research. This was, I think, in 2017 or 15. I can't remember. I was looking at L'Oreal, the brand L'Oreal, and
Mhm.
if I did the math right, they're spending about 30% of their revenue on advertising. Is that a sweet number, a sweet spot, or what do you recommend to people?
Here's the thing. You have to look at your cost, right? Your cost of goods, your cost of going to market, your cost of acquisition, and all of that. And you can't outspend what your ROI is going to be. So you have to start by understanding how a company makes money and how much money it makes in the first place. And then you have to understand what are their goals and how much money they need to invest to reach those goals. Bigger goals take more money or more time necessarily in that process, or some type of significant change. So I start by telling conversations to clients because I said, look, what is your budget? I'll always ask, what is your budget? And a lot of times they don't want to tell you because they're afraid to put their cards on the table. But I say, look, I can't design a plan. There's no point in me designing a plan for $1 million when you only want to spend 100,000, or $10 million when you only want to spend $1 million, or $100 million when you only want to spend $10 million, right? Because you're over engineering at that point. Or vice versa. There's no point in me thinking you're going to spend 100 $100,000 when you're thinking you're going to spend $10 million, and I engineer the plan and I don't come close to achieving the success you want. So you need to be honest in this process with those that you're working with. A good agency will demonstrate how they're going to invest your budget properly. You still don't have to hire them. They're not going to charge you more because you give them more. They're going to have to justify their investments no matter what they do. Um, they're trying to vet you as much as you're trying to vet them, because they shouldn't take you on if they don't believe they can be successful with you.
Hmm.
And so clients will tell me, it sounds like you're hiring me.
Yeah.
I'm like, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. I'm trying to find out if we're the right fit for you. I get, several leads a week and they don't fit us. We're not what they're looking for. We're not who they need. We don't have experience in it necessarily. Or they just need something and it's not the thing we want or sell the most, or they don't want to follow our process. And so I'll try to recommend that they go to the right person I think might help them, whether they're fit for me. But I only really want to take those opportunities that I'm going to be most successful with, because I want to protect my experience. I want to ensure the growth in my reputation, and I don't do that by taking everything. Not everybody is the right customer. For
Right.
the true with any client.
It's
Any
true.
Some customers are generally more profitable or not, and it might be because they're more difficult, or they require more hand holding, or they require more returns and complaints, whatever it might be. You want to attract the best customer, the purest customer to your brand. Those are the ones who become your advocates, your loyalists. Go back to the very beginning of the conversation. They preach and sound you the most, right? And they don't trash talk you out there.
Hmm.
Those are the best customers, that you want to
Mm-hmm.
have. You want it to be a win-win for everybody. This is not about, taking advantage of them, selling them stuff they don't need, or lying to them. This is about being honest and authentic. And the brands that do that and that know who they are, those are the ones that do really, really well. The brands that are constantly trying to switch up who they are, they honestly don't know who they are. They haven't figured it out yet. They're trying
Yeah.
to decide how they're relevant to the marketplace.
Yeah.
So budget. Your question is, budget.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure it's proportional to your margins that you're willing to invest according to the growth goals that you're going after. It could be 0.5%, it could be 10%.
Mm-hmm.
You know, B2C companies on average, in my opinion, I'm not, I perceive that they spend a little bit higher budgets than most of my B2B clients are willing to spend. But again, do you have a low price point? Do you have a high price point? Do you have
Right.
a short sales cycle? Do you have a high sales cycle? Are you highly differentiated or are you commoditized? These variables are going to affect the proper investment strategies that you should make in that. Is it one and done? Is it a lifetime customer value that you're looking at? You know, you might sell somebody something that's $10, but you might sell it to them 1,000 times over 10 years,
Mm-hmm.
or you might sell it to them once. The proper investment has to be considering those differences, you know.
Wow. Now, how do you define success, Jonathan?
I succeed when my client succeeds in this process, right? So whatever their goals are, whatever the reason they hired me for, my success is determined by getting them as close as possible to that or exceeding that goal. If I don't, I probably didn't succeed in that. And I need to do it in a way that is enjoyable, fun, friendly, polite, professional, because the ends doesn't necessarily justify the means, right? You want to have a great working relationship. I might get them to their goals, but it might be a horrible experience. I would not define that by itself as success. So I think the definition of success has multiple components to it that you want to consider in this process. Did I work with somebody that I like, that I trust, and that delivers and fulfills their promises? Back to branding. Um, and am I willing to do it again? Am I willing to advocate for them? Those are successes in my mind. That's what we're aiming for. It's a lot easier to keep a customer, a lot more efficient, a lot less expensive than to go get new customers all the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want attrition, but I will have attrition because sometimes my goal is to get a client sold.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, my goal is to get them to a point where they don't work with us anymore. I've literally been hired to help build internal teams before and train internal teams. I was hired by one client, said, "You had 18 months and I want you gone."
Wow.
So you have to get us where we need to go in those 18 months and help hire people and train them so that you eventually don't have to do the thing that we're paying you to do.
Wow.
That was success, working myself out of a job. Um, I have driven more leads than than the salespeople can service sometimes, and I have to shut down the campaigns and put it on pause,
Oh yeah.
and stop working for a client. That's
Too
so
much. Too
success.
much of a good thing, huh?
Too much of a good thing
Literally.
is it can be a bad thing for some companies if they don't
Yeah.
handle it the right way.
Right. Right.
You want to temper, because if I jam a bunch of stuff in and not prepared to handle,
Can't
that
deliver
experience
it.
is not going to be necessarily positive, and then
Hmm.
I will have wasted or squandered those dollars of that activity.
Absolutely.
So going back to that SWOT diagram, that diagram and analysis, making sure that they are prepared for what you're doing is the right thing, in all this. So that's what a good plan does, is it
Yeah.
looks at the timing, it looks at the delivery, it looks at those touch points, and it makes sure that everything is going to work accordingly, or at least to the hypothesis that you set out, and then you adjust as needed for that. So yeah, I think those are keys, some of the keys to success, is, am I enjoying it? Are you enjoying it? Do we want to do this again together? And are we getting there? That's going to determine success. It's not, did I win a bunch of awards, or,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Or
um, that might be personally gratifying, but I don't think that's success in life. It's, making others better, our mission is to inspire people to create, transform, and grow. It's not to sell more stuff.
wow.
So,
That's pretty powerful.
so, and so if I inspire you to create something, a new process, a better way of doing it, inspire you, transform a system that makes it more efficient or makes it more profitable, and if I inspire you to grow into new markets, or to grow a product line, or to grow your perspective on something, then I feel like I'm doing my job. If it's all positive and it's all going in the right direction, then I feel like we're living up to our mission.
On your personal journey, what are some lessons that have really stood out to you? Like if you could give yourself advice, what would you tell yourself?
Um, well, I would say that you do need a good work-life balance. You do need, early on, I probably worked too much in my life. Uh, just was too driven, you know, in some cases. And I think that you need, um, humility is good. Going back to all experts are wrong 17.5% of the time. I think our younger selves are probably just, I think in your 20s, you might think you know more than you know. Anybody that's raised kids might see that. Uh, my dad used to have an expression that he would say, "You're a walking encyclopedia of misinformation."
That's really funny.
I think that's something he used to tell me when I was a teenager, you know. Um, so let me tell you how that's right. But uh, so I think, realizing that you're never going to do it alone, no matter what you're doing, it's probably going to be a team effort, and it's important to develop those skills as much as the craft itself. You can be an expert at amazing, but you can be a jerk too. So I have to soften my edges, you know, and
You're actively softening your
I
edges,
spent a
huh?
lifetime working on it, but I'm not. I'm probably not that much softer at the end of the day.
Oh my
but
gosh, that's pretty funny.
but I'd like to try. I'd like to be that better person every day. Be somebody that. But I think it does help, and I think you can't have too many friends, and you can't know too many people in this business, because
Mm-hmm.
you never know when you're going to need something, or need to direct somebody to get something or find something. And if you live by that philosophy, then I think you'll generally succeed. And it's always the golden rule, right? Do unto others. Don't
Mm-hmm.
don't do it if you wouldn't expect it back. That kind of thing. So I try to put out what I expect to receive, and no more, no less necessarily in that regard. And I want people to be honest with me, and otherwise I can't get better. I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, or where I can improve. So I appreciate that
Mm-hmm.
transparency. I appreciate the support and the teamwork, and so I need to be a good team player too. So I think it's kind of the golden rule in many cases, and trying to take a little bit of a pause and realize that, wait a second, you might be wrong. You need to double check this, or go ask, and don't assume. And be empathetic. Somebody could be having a bad day. I constantly, we should talk to our team about this a lot. You don't know what kind of day that person's having at home. You don't know if their kid's sick, if their mom's in the hospital, whatever it might be. If they're stressed out because their spouse just lost their job, and they're afraid of making their mortgage payment. You don't know. So just take a minute, and before you react, or before you assume, and realize that you're not the center of the universe at this moment for them, probably.
Yeah,
And there
yeah.
are other things going on in their world, and I like to say we're not saving babies on the operating table. So
Mm, amen to that. That's too much pressure for that, isn't it? Yeah.
how important is marketing, right? Our branding, or like, okay, picking this color, deciding this, trade show decision today is, well, it can have huge implications. Remind yourself that you're not the end all be all, and that what you're doing, while it may have some big implications, you may not be saving lives that moment, in time.
So much good stuff, and I really appreciate you coming out today and being a part of the show. And hopefully, we'll have you back on again, right?
Yeah, they, if you really want to put me through the ringer again, I'm fine. Yeah, I'll come back. Your questions, I love them. So they're good questions, and
I'm
they're
tough.
questions people should
Well,
ask themselves when they jump
thank
into
you.
this process. So there, honestly,
Thank
there's a ton of
you.
insights and articles on our website. We do try to publish and share our knowledge, and share our experiences through case studies, and through other stories on the website. So if anybody wants to go, I don't know how many dozens and dozens and dozens of articles that are there. They can read it, or they can watch it, or they can listen to it through the podcast, through the YouTube channels, to the Insight articles. So it's all free. Go enjoy, share. knock yourself out. And follow us
Yeah,
on social channels. We
definitely.
constantly post stuff on the social channels as well, through
Okay.
LinkedIn and Instagram and Facebook and whatnot. So
Mm-hmm.
all those links are from our website as well. So
Okay.
yeah, thank you very much for this. It's been just so much fun.
Well, that's because it's a fun
I
subject and you're a fun person. So, like, it just makes it easier.
Yeah, so thank you for doing what you do, sharing your knowledge and
Of course.
bringing a channel to those out there that are interested. And so it's great. I appreciate it very, very much. Thank you. It's been an honor.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. If you did, please subscribe to Making It to Market wherever you listen to podcasts or listen from our website, makingittomarket.com. Thank you for your honest 5-star rating and review on Apple Podcast. And a special thanks to our listeners and show sponsors. Without your support, I wouldn't be able to do this. As you know, Making It to Market is a new show, and I need your help to get the word out. Feel free to share links to your favorite episodes. You don't want to miss the next one. If there's a topic you'd like to hear, have a comment, or even a question you'd like for me to address, feel free to leave me a voice message on our podcast phone line. If we air your question or comment in an upcoming episode, we'll send you a Making It to Market t-shirt or mug. Details are in the show notes. Thanks for listening. Until next time, make decisions that make a difference.